The sun had barely crested the jagged ridges of the Colorado Rockies when Ethan Kincaid stepped out of his beat-up pickup, squinting at the raw, uneven expanse of land he'd claimed on a whim. Dust clung to the soles of his boots, and the wind carried a sharp, piney scent that cut through the chill. He surveyed the empty plot, imagining something no one else could yet see. A fortress not of bricks or vinyl siding, but of stone and shadow, a house that whispered of mystery and endurance. "You're really doing this, huh?" a voice called from the road. Ethan turned to see Tom and Lisa Barrett, neighbors since he'd moved to the county 6 months ago. Tom had a baseball cap pulled low. Lisa had that faint, smirking curl to her lips that made Ethan's stomach knot. "I don't see why not," Ethan said, shrugging. He'd learned early that explanations never softened the ridicule, they only fed it. "Gonna make it cozy." "Cozy?" Lisa laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Looks like a cave. Seriously, Ethan, people pay for sunlight in the winter and you're digging yourself into a rock." Ethan smiled faintly, letting the comment wash over him. He'd expected it. Mockery had followed him like a shadow since he'd bought the plot with every cent he'd scraped together. They didn't understand. They couldn't. He wasn't building a conventional house. He was building a sanctuary, a place that could survive the harshest winters this side of the Rockies without relying on the fickle mercy of the power grid. "I like caves," Ethan said simply, tightening his gloves. "They hold heat, they last." Tom shook his head, chuckling, and walked back toward his truck. "Well, I'll be watching," he called over his shoulder. "This should be entertaining." Alone again, Ethan let himself smile. He had a vision, a facade that mimicked a natural rock formation blending into the landscape, its interior insulated and smartly designed to trap and radiate warmth. People might mock it now, but in a storm, they'd envy it. That thought was enough to steady his nerves as he turned to his tools. The first weeks were a blur of labor. He carved out the skeleton of the cave house with the help of a rented mini-excavator, his hands blistered and raw. Each stone he stacked, each wall he reinforced with earth and mortar felt like a silent declaration. He would endure. The neighbors' laughter echoed in his ears, but he refused to respond. Mockery faded when it had no audience. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of hauling stone, Ethan stood at the threshold of the cave facade, watching the sun bleed crimson into the jagged peaks. He imagined the heat from a fire pooling in the low stone chamber, the way the walls would absorb it and slowly release it over days. His fingers traced the rough texture of the rocks, and for a moment he felt an almost spiritual connection to the earth itself. "You're insane," Lisa's voice called from the road again. Ethan didn't flinch. "Maybe," he said quietly, almost to himself, "or maybe just patient." Winter came fast that year, earlier than the forecasts had predicted. Snow fell in thick, muffling blankets, the kind that coated every tree branch and flattened the fences. Roads became slick and treacherous. The county's grid struggled to keep up. Tom and Lisa Barrett were the first to call, whining about frozen pipes and heaters that wouldn't hold warmth. Ethan listened politely but offered no solutions. He had his own fortress to tend. Inside the cave, he had lit the first fire. It crackled and spat embers against the stone hearth, and for the first time he felt the gentle, life-giving warmth seep into his bones. The walls absorbed it, radiating heat evenly through the space. He moved slowly through the chamber, testing the temperature, checking the corners. The cave breathed warmth like a living thing, patient and unyielding. By nightfall, snow had piled several feet high. Winds howled outside, rattling the facade, but inside, Ethan was cocooned in a calm that seemed almost otherworldly. He ate a simple dinner, sitting on a bench he'd carved from a single slab of stone, and felt a satisfaction deeper than any compliment could provide. Out there, the Barretts' heaters sputtered and failed. In here, he was untouchable. It was on the third day of the storm that the Barretts' car skidded off the road, just beyond the ridge. Ethan was returning from checking the outer insulation when he saw the flash of red against the white drifts. He ran toward it, heart hammering, snow biting at his face. Tom Barrett stumbled from the car, shivering, his pride as broken as his lip. "Ethan, we didn't think," he gasped. Lisa clung to his arm, tears streaking through the snow on her face. Ethan didn't answer. He led them down the slope to the cave. The interior enveloped them like a warm embrace, and the Barretts' eyes widened, disbelief etching every line of their faces. The fire had dwindled slightly over the 3 days, The walls retained the heat, almost as if the house itself were alive. Lisa sank to the stone bench, hands pressed to her face. It's warm," she whispered, voice trembling. "How?" Ethan simply smiled, brushing snow from his jacket. "Caves hold heat. That's all. You just have to build it right." For the first time, Ethan noticed a shift, not just in their expressions, but in the air around him. The laughter, the mockery, the judgment that had seemed permanent, it evaporated in the warmth of the cave. They were not his enemies here. They were people who had doubted, and now, finally, they understood. The storm raged outside for hours, but inside the cave they were safe. The Barretts huddled by the fire, reluctant to speak, while Ethan watched the snow swirl against the windows he had carefully embedded in the stone, designed to let in light but trap heat. He felt a quiet pride, the kind that comes from not just surviving, but anticipating the impossible and making it happen. That night, as the wind howled like a chorus of ghosts outside, Ethan sat in his cave, the fire flickering softly, and realized that this was more than a house. It was a statement, a testament, a promise. He had built something that could withstand the storm, that could endure when others faltered. And he had done it with patience, foresight, and a stubborn refusal to bend to ridicule. For the first time in months, he slept deeply, the warmth wrapping around him like a shield. Tomorrow, the snow would melt, the neighbors would emerge blinking into sunlight, and the story of the cave facade would spread like wildfire. But tonight, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Because he knew, truly knew, that when the world mocked the visionaries, it was only because they hadn't yet seen the future those visionaries could build. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, a quiet triumph burned brighter than any flame. The morning after the storm was like stepping into another world. The Colorado sun had turned the blanket of snow into a glittering expanse, each flake sparkling like tiny diamonds. The roads were still slick, the forest silent except for the occasional cracking of frozen branches under the weight of ice. Ethan stepped outside his cave facade, surveying the land with a mixture of satisfaction and wariness. Winter's fury had passed, for now, but he knew nature had a way of testing patience more than once. By mid-morning, the Barretts arrived at the edge of his property. Tom's truck struggled up the icy incline, tires spinning in shallow drifts. Lisa sat beside him, wrapped in a quilt from their car, eyes wide as they took in the sight of the cave house. The snow clung to Ethan's shoulders and the rough stones of his facade, giving him the appearance of some ancient guardian of the land. "Ethan," Tom called, voice tighter than he intended. We wanted to," he stopped, unsure. Words seemed insufficient. Lisa spoke instead, her tone quieter, tinged with awe. "We didn't believe it could hold heat like that. 3 days, Ethan, 3 days." Her gaze swept over the stone walls, then to the small, smoke-twisting chimney he'd installed. It's like magic." Ethan allowed a small smile. Not magic, physics and a little stubbornness. They fell into an awkward silence. The Barretts had been his harshest critics, their laughter a constant drone in the background since he'd started construction. And now, in the soft glow of post-storm sunlight, it felt surreal to see them humbled. Ethan didn't gloat. That wasn't his style. He simply watched, letting the moment breathe, letting them understand that ridicule had no power over someone who believed in their own vision. Word of the cave house spread quickly through the county. By noon, neighbors who had once mocked Ethan began to stop by, not all but enough to make him uneasy. Some came curious, some skeptical, some eager to see what he had achieved. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, questions flew. Does it really stay warm? Is it safe? How do you even live in that? Ethan answered patiently, demonstrating the heat retention, the layered insulation, the stone wall's thermal capacity. Each answer seemed to push back the invisible barrier of doubt. Some faces softened into admiration, others remained masked with disbelief. But the tide had shifted. Then came the county inspector. Mr. Holloway was a thin man with a sharp suit, a clipboard, and an expression that suggested he had seen every violation and loophole imaginable. He circled the cave facade, tapping walls with a gloved hand, peering into the carefully integrated windows, inspecting the reinforced stone arches. "Ethan Kincaid," he began, squinting in the sunlight, "I have to admit I didn't expect this. Most people build standard homes, vinyl siding, wood frames, basic insulation. This," He gestured at the stone facade, snow sparkling on its rough surfaces. "This is unusual." "It works," Ethan said Ply shrugging. "That's the goal." Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Unusual, yes. Ingenious, maybe. I'll need to run tests, of course, but from what I see, it's holding up remarkably well. I'll be recommending full approval." Approval, the word struck Ethan with a force he didn't expect. It wasn't just bureaucracy, it was validation. He had built something that the world deemed impractical, something they had mocked, and yet here it stood, approved and functional, a testament to vision over convention. That night, Ethan sat inside his cave, the fire crackling, while outside the world began to whisper about his project. The Barretts had left, still in awe, promising to spread the story. But Ethan knew this was just the beginning. Curiosity and admiration could turn into envy, and with envy came pressure. People would want to replicate it, challenge it, maybe even tear it down if they misunderstood it. He wasn't naive. He had seen the way the world reacted to what it couldn't immediately comprehend. But he also knew something deeper. Once someone experiences warmth in the dead of winter, once someone sees a house that survives where others falter, they remember it. And memory breeds respect. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan spent time refining the cave's interior, carving niches for storage, adjusting the ventilation to maximize airflow, and installing a simple but effective water collection system that relied on melting snow. Each adjustment was a quiet victory, a demonstration that practical vision could coexist with survival instinct. One evening, a journalist arrived, clutching a notepad and camera. "I'm from the Denver Chronicle," she said, extending a hand. "Heard about your cave house. Mind if I write a story?" Ethan shook her hand, keeping his expression neutral. "I don't mind, but I warn you, it's just a house that works the way it should." The journalist smiled. Sometimes the simplest stories are the most fascinating. By the time she left, Ethan realized something. His life had shifted. The ridicule, the laughter, the disbelief, it had all become fuel. Every doubter, every mocking glance, every scoff had hardened his resolve. The cave wasn't just a structure. It was a symbol of perseverance, of seeing potential where others saw absurdity. Then came the unthinkable, the first big power outage. A massive ice storm had hit neighboring counties, toppling power lines, snapping trees like twigs. Homes went dark, people bundled in blankets and waited, shivering. Ethan's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from neighbors, people who had mocked him, even some he barely knew, pleading for help. Ethan remained calm. Inside his cave, the heat radiated steadily, the fire burning bright, the stone walls holding warmth as if the house itself were alive. One by one, neighbors arrived, huddling inside, faces pale with cold, eyes wide with awe. "Ethan, we don't know how to thank you," Lisa Barrett whispered, her teeth chattering despite the warmth around her. We were wrong." Ethan shrugged. "You don't have to thank me, you just have to survive." And survive they did. 3 days passed with no electricity, no heat from conventional sources, and yet everyone inside the cave remained comfortable, nourished, and safe. Stories began to circulate. The man who built a cave house that defied winter, the structure that mocked conventional wisdom and survived, the small fortress that held warmth longer than any electric heater could. Ethan knew this was just the beginning. He had won the immediate battle, mockery turned into admiration, but the larger war was yet to come. People would want to test, to copy, to challenge. They would question his methods, his motives, his sanity. But he had something they didn't: foresight and patience, the quiet confidence of someone who built for the long term. Late that night, alone by the fire, Ethan felt a mixture of relief and resolve. Relief that his cave had proven itself, and resolve that he would continue, that he would refine and expand and show the world the value of patience and vision. The wind howled outside, rattling the stone facade, but inside the fire crackled, warmth pooled in every corner, and Ethan felt an unshakable certainty. He had built more than a house. He had built proof. And proof, he realized, had a power far greater than ridicule. Spring crept into the mountains cautiously, shedding snow in hesitant patches, and teasing the early shoots of pine needles through frost-hardened soil. Ethan walked the perimeter of his property, boots crunching over the last of winter's ice, surveying his cave house in the crisp morning air. The facade gleamed faintly, damp from the thawing snow. The rough-hewn stones darkened and almost alive with the lingering moisture. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs fragile against the whispering wind. The attention he had garnered during the winter storm had transformed his quiet life. People who onk. He crossed the street to avoid him now waved, asked questions. Some even offered to help with maintenance or improvements. While the change was flattering, it was also unnerving. Ethan had built the cave to survive isolation, not to be the center of attention. But attention was unavoidable when your house defied every expectation and survival instinct in the area. One morning, a local builder named Marcus Calloway arrived, clipboard in hand, surveying the facade like a man measuring something too strange to fit neatly into his world. Marcus was solidly built, with sun-streaked hair and a calm, almost casual confidence. He had been one of the first skeptics who'd laughed at Ethan's project, but today his expression was inscrutable. "So this is it," Marcus said, tapping a stone gently with his knuckle. "I didn't believe it through the storm, but it really held." Ethan nodded, brushing snow from his jacket. "Not just held, it sustained. You could spend a week in here, never worry about heat or power, and barely notice the storm outside." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Impressive, but I have to ask, the thermal design, the stone density, the insulation layering, it's unconventional. How much of this was planned and how much was intuition?" Ethan chuckled. "Equal parts stubbornness and research. The stones, the facade, the fire, it all interacts. Heat moves differently here than in a normal house. You can't copy it without understanding the physics." Marcus scribbled notes, muttering under his breath. "You might be onto something bigger than a house, maybe a new standard for sustainable structures in extreme climates." Ethan didn't respond, letting the thought linger. He had never built for recognition. Recognition had its merits, but he cared more about results. Still, hearing someone articulate the possibilities of his methods stirred a cautious optimism within him. As spring deepened, so did Ethan's connection to the land. He walked farther from the cave, mapping natural drainage paths, planting early shrubs to reduce soil erosion around the facade, and monitoring wind patterns that could affect the heat retention in winter. Every observation, every adjustment, reinforced the feeling that this was more than architecture, it was stewardship. He was not only building a home, but a model of resilience. It was during one of these walks that the trouble began. A sudden rumble echoed through the mountain pass, low and insistent, like the earth itself warning him. Ethan froze, scanning the slopes. Then he saw it, a small landslide dislodged by thawing snow heading toward the western approach of his property. "No," he muttered, adrenaline spiking. He sprinted down the slope, feet sliding on loose soil, heart pounding. He had planned for storms, for snow, for cold, but landslides, they were unpredictable. The slide struck the edge of the property with a roar, dirt and rocks cascading toward the cave facade. Ethan ran, grabbing a rope and securing heavy stones to act as a temporary barrier. His hands were raw, bleeding, muscles screaming, but he refused to retreat. The slide halted just inches from the outer walls, thanks in part to his quick thinking and part to the facade's robust design. Breathing heavily, Ethan surveyed the damage. Some stones had shifted, earth had scoured the lower perimeter, but the cave itself remained intact, unyielding. Relief flooded through him, mingled with exhaustion. He knew neighbors watching from the road would have been awestruck or terrified. Either way, the facade had proven itself again. By evening, word of the near landslide had reached the county. People came by, offering help, asking questions, expressing genuine concern. The Barretts appeared again, eyes wide with fear and admiration. "Ethan," Lisa said, her voice shaking, "I don't know how you stay so calm. Most of us would have, I don't know, panicked." Ethan shrugged, wiping sweat and dirt from his brow. "I didn't panic because I prepared, that's all. Preparation, patience, that's what makes a house like this more than just stone and mortar." The experience left him contemplative. He realized the cave house was no longer just a personal project. It had become a beacon, a lesson in foresight and resilience for the community. And with that came an unexpected responsibility. People expected him to lead, to explain, to guide. That wasn't what he wanted, but he understood its necessity. Then one evening, As the sun dipped behind jagged peaks, painting the snow in shades of crimson and gold, Ethan received a call from a local TV station. They wanted to do a feature on him to showcase the house and his methods. He hesitated. Exposure had always been a double-edged sword. Fame could bring admiration, but also scrutiny, skepticism, and intrusion. Still, he knew he had a choice: hide his work or share it with those who might benefit. He agreed cautiously. Filming began the next week. Cameras captured the rough stone fossa, glinting in the late afternoon sun, the fire crackling within, the carefully carved niches, the ingenious water collection system. Ethan spoke quietly, explaining how he approached each problem, how he considered natural forces, how patience was as important as skill. The crew watched in silent awe as he demonstrated heat retention, measured temperatures at various points in the cave, and explained the subtle interplay of stone, earth, and fire. The cameraman muttered under his breath, "This guy's a genius." But it wasn't the recognition that stirred Ethan, it was the ripple effect. He saw it in the eyes of the crew, in the subtle nods of understanding. People were beginning to see that building with intention, that anticipating nature rather than fighting it was revolutionary in its quiet way. As the cameras packed up and the crew departed, Ethan returned to the cave, the evening chill brushing at his cheeks. He fed the fire, watched the flames reflect off the rough stones, and felt a deep, almost spiritual satisfaction. This was his vision, tested by nature and now witnessed by the world. And yet, even in triumph, a sense of unease lingered. He knew the bigger challenges were still ahead, storms that would come, curiosity that would demand answers, and perhaps envy that would test patience in ways mockery never could. But for the first time, Ethan felt not just prepared, but empowered. He had built something enduring, something that demanded respect, not just from nature, but from people too. As night settled over the mountains, the fire glowed warmly in the cave's interior. Outside, the valley was quiet, the stars piercing through the clear sky, and in that stillness, Ethan understood the truth he had known all along. The cave was more than a house, it was a testament. A testament to patience, to foresight, to endurance. And perhaps, he thought with a small smile, to the stubborn kind of genius that the world often mocks before it learns to admire. Summer arrived quietly, folding the mountains into warm hues of gold and green. The snow was gone, replaced by wildflowers that peeked through thawed soil, their petals nodding in the soft morning breeze. Ethan walked the perimeter of his property, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, hands brushing against the rough edges of the stone facade. Everything had settled, walls, paths, and the earth itself, but the story of the cave house had only just begun to reach its crescendo. The feature on the local TV station had aired, and suddenly Ethan's life was a whirlwind. People drove hours to see the cave house, some skeptical, some curious, some simply captivated by the idea of a home that seemed to defy nature and convention. Emails and messages poured in, requests for advice, questions about design, even offers for collaboration from builders who recognized the genius of his methods. Yet the barrage of attention was tempered by a sense of purpose. Ethan hadn't built the cave for fame. He built it to endure, to protect, to demonstrate that vision combined with patience could create something extraordinary. But now, seeing the effect it had on people, he realized he had a responsibility to share knowledge without losing control, to inspire without compromising the sanctuary he had painstakingly created. One afternoon, Marcus Calloway returned, this time with 2 colleagues. They had driven from Denver, curious to see if Ethan's methods could be applied on a larger scale. Marcus was energetic, pacing back and forth, sketching diagrams in the dirt with a stick. "If we replicate these principles on a commercial scale," he said, voice low and urgent, "we could revolutionize housing in extreme climates. We're talking energy efficiency, sustainability, safety." Ethan listened, arms crossed, eyes scanning the stone walls that had protected him and his neighbors through winter storms and landslides. "It works because it's tailored," he said carefully. "You can't just copy it. You have to understand the land, the materials, the forces at play." Marcus nodded, scribbling furiously. "That's exactly why I'm here. You know the principles, we know the scale. Together, we could make something that lasts centuries." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He had built in solitude, in defiance of mockery and doubt, and the thought of handing over that knowledge to others brought a flicker of hesitation. But he also knew the potential. More people protected, more homes that could survive harsh conditions, more communities safe from winter's fury. He sighed, finally. "All right," he said quietly. "But you follow my methods exactly. No shortcuts, no cutting corners, nature isn't forgiving." They agreed, shaking hands in the fading sunlight. It felt momentous, the first step toward transforming a personal triumph into a legacy. Weeks later, the cave house became a local legend. Tourists, students, journalists, even architects visited, each fascinated by the blend of practice, and vision. The Barretts became unlikely allies, guiding visitors through the surrounding trails, recounting their initial skepticism and the awe they felt during the winter storm. "You have to see it to believe it," Lisa would tell people, a hint of pride in her voice. But the pinnacle of the cave house's impact came unexpectedly. A late summer storm descended with little warning, rain lashing against the mountains, winds bending trees to the ground. The county's old power grid failed again, leaving dozens of homes dark, cold, and vulnerable. Word reached Ethan quickly. He grabbed supplies, blankets, food, water, and opened his doors. People came running, families, children, elderly neighbors, people who had once mocked him, people who had once doubted. Inside the cave, the warmth radiated steadily. The fire burned, the stone walls held heat, and water collected in a carefully designed trough, filtered and safe for drinking. Ethan moved among the people, distributing blankets, offering reassurances, and quietly marveling at the scene. "This is incredible," whispered a young mother, clutching her child. "We don't even feel cold. How is this possible?" Ethan knelt beside her, brushing dirt from his hands. "It's simple physics and a little patience. The house does the work for you, you just have to respect it." For 3 days, the cave house sheltered dozens from the relentless storm. The snow and rain outside battered the land, but inside, people laughed, shared stories, and marveled at Ethan's creation. By the time the skies cleared, the legend of the cave house had solidified. When the storm ended, the community gathered outside the facade. Ethan stepped back, watching faces illuminated by the golden evening sun, expressions ranging from awe to gratitude. Tom Barrett clapped him on the shoulder, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "You were right," he said simply. "All of it, every bit." Lisa nodded, eyes glistening. "I can't believe I laughed at you. This is extraordinary." Ethan smiled, not out of pride, but because he finally understood the depth of what he had achieved. The cave house was more than a building. It was a testament to endurance, vision, and quiet genius. It had turned mockery into admiration, fear into relief, and doubt into hope. As the crowd dispersed and twilight settled over the mountains, Ethan returned inside. The fire crackled softly, reflecting off the rough stone walls, and he allowed himself a moment of stillness. This house, born of stubbornness, planning, and a refusal to bow to ridicule, had become a sanctuary not just for him, but for the people around him. He knew life would continue, storms would come, and challenges would arise. But now there was no fear, only confidence, earned through experience and resilience. He had built more than a house. He had built proof that patience, vision, and courage could triumph over doubt. Outside, the mountains were silent, the wind soft now, the stars brilliant and cold. Inside, warmth radiated through stone and earth, a silent reminder that even the harshest conditions could be tamed with foresight and determination. Ethan stood at the threshold, hands resting on the rough stone, and looked out at the world he had built, the world he had survived, the world he had changed, not through power or wealth, but through quiet genius and relentless perseverance. The cave house had held heat for 3 days, but its warmth would linger far longer, in hearts, minds, and the story of a man who dared to see possibility where others saw only a hole in the ground. And as he stoked the fire for another evening, Ethan Kincaid knew, with a deep, unshakable certainty, that some visions were worth enduring mockery, doubt, and storms for. Some houses were built not just to survive, but to inspire. The mockery had faded, the triumph was real, and the legend of the cave house had only just begun.